everyone, today we will be making sourdough spelt flatbread. This flatbread has 50% spelt flour, so it's a pretty high amount of spelt flour, which means it's healthy. Also, we'll see later that spelt is pretty extendable. It doesn't necessarily build gluten better, but it is more extendable, which is going to be great when we're forming our flatbreads. We can really stretch it out pretty far. And this isn't just a sourdough discard recipe, this is a sourdough recipe. That means we are fermenting the flatbread, which in my opinion makes the result better. It's well worth it. This recipe is super easy, so let's just get into it. We started with 150 grams of sourdough starter, and then we added 260 grams of water and 6 grams of salt, and then we're just going to mix it up. 150 grams of sourdough starter is quite a lot for this recipe, and the reason why I put that much in is because I want this to ferment quickly. But if you are on a different schedule or you live in a warm climate, you might want to start with 100 grams of sourdough starter and work from there. So now we're going to add in our dry ingredients. Like I said, this is a 50% spelt flour recipe, so we're going to add 200 grams of whole grain spelt flour and 200 grams of bread flour. I have made this before with all spelt flour and it does work, but the bread flour really helps make it fluffier because the bread flour has more gluten, or it has the capability of building more gluten. So I like to do a 50-50 mix. If you want to make 100% whole grain spelt flour flatbread, it is a possibility. I have done it before, but the end result won't be as fluffy. Now we're going to just mix in the dry ingredients and then gently knead it until it forms a ball. And then we can really just leave it aside for a half hour. Just like other sourdough recipes, the gluten will start building on its own. So we'll leave it aside for a half hour and then we'll come back and do our stretch and folds. After a half hour has passed, take out your dough and you're going to start performing your stretch and folds. Now you can see me here performing the stretch and folds. I stretch out the dough and I fold it back over the dough, and I keep doing that to each side of the dough until the dough feels tight. You want to go around the whole dough at least once. I usually do it around 2 times. You can see the dough looking tighter, even though you can't feel the dough like I can right here. You can see in this video that the dough starts to look tighter as I'm doing this. And then you're going to cover it back up and wait another half hour before performing a second set of stretch and folds. After another half hour, you're going to perform a second set of stretch and folds in the same way you did before. And I tried to show you a window pane test here, which is when I stretch it out and I try to see through it without breaking the dough. The dough did break a little bit, which shows that the gluten needs more time to develop, but you can still see that the gluten is fairly strong, much stronger than it was in the previous stretch and fold. And when you're done with this stretch and fold, you're going to cover it up again and wait another half hour to do the third and final set of stretch and folds. And now we're going to perform our last set of stretch and folds. Now look, as I'm stretching this, how smooth it looks and how easily it glides up. It does, in a few seconds, you'll see that it does break a little bit. If that's still happening at this stage, you might want to perform a fourth set of stretch and folds. It's just because of the high percentage of spelt flour in it that makes it very extendable, but not necessarily as strong as when you're using bread flour. So you could do another set of stretch and folds if you want to build the gluten more. The gluten is fairly strong here, especially for what we're doing. We're just making a flatbread, and I'm not too worried about the oven spring and things like that I would be worried about if I had made a loaf. When we're done with our stretch and folds, we're going to cover this up and let it ferment for 3 to 6 hours, or until the dough doubles in size. Now I'm using a 2.5 liter bowl. If you have the same size bowl as me, it's fairly easy to tell when it's done. It'll be done when it fills the bowl almost to the top, but doesn't quite touch the cap. So it'll fill the bowl, but won't quite touch the cap. I like to use this size bowl when I'm making single loaves, or for example, single batches like this one, because it's very easy to tell when it's done. Once your dough is doubled, you're going to take it out onto a floured surface and divide it into 6 pieces. You want to make the pieces as even as possible. They should be about 130 grams each. If they're not even, which you can see mine will end up not being even, you can just, you weigh them out, and then you can take some pieces from the larger ones and add it to the smaller pieces, as you see me doing here. Roll your pieces into a little ball. Use the flour on your surface so it doesn't stick. And then you can use your rolling pin and roll it out into the shape you want for your flatbread. I roll mine out into an oval shape. You can roll yours out into a circular shape if you prefer. They don't have to be perfect at this point, because we're going to stretch them out again before we put them onto the hot griddle. So we'll actually stretch them out with our hands before we put them onto the hot pan. Now you're going to want to heat your pan up on medium-high heat. I'm using a cast iron skillet because it retains heat pretty well. I'm also using a portable electric stove top just so I can show all of you this. It's easier to do that than do it in my kitchen, but it has a little bit more difficulty maintaining heat. If you do it on your gas stove top, you'll be fine. You want to wait until your pan is hot, very hot. It should be smoking, right? It should be that hot. And when it's that hot, you can start placing your flatbreads onto the pan. Before you place your flatbreads onto the pan, you want to stretch them out with your hands to the thickness that you want. You want it pretty thin, but not so thin that you can see through it. So you want it thin enough that it's maybe like 1/8 of an inch, but you still can't see through it. That'll give you a fluffier result. If you get it too thin, it's less fluffy, essentially. So that's how thin you want it. Then you're going to put it right onto your your pan rather. Put it right onto your pan, and then 2 minutes each side. You see it should be slightly brown when you flip it. Another way to tell that it's ready to be flipped is it starts bubbling up, right? So first it'll start bubbling up on one side, then when you flip it, wait 2 minutes, it'll start puffing up almost like pita bread puffs up, but there will not be a pocket at the end, unfortunately. This will not give you pita bread, but it will puff up like there is a pocket. And there you have it. You have 6 sourdough spelt flatbreads to use. Sometimes you just spread things on it like avocado or peanut butter. Sometimes I stuff vegan crab cakes in it and make it like a sandwich. There's so many things you can do with it. It doesn't last as long as a full loaf of sourdough bread, maybe 2 to 3 days, and it'll start to get stale. But you can always reheat it on the stovetop or put it in the microwave for about 30 seconds and it will soften up again. But yeah, there you go. Thank you for watching and have a great day. See you soon.